Night, you're invited to set the day gently aside. Wherever you are listening from, perhaps a quiet bedroom, a familiar living room, or a softly lit corner of your home, this story is here to help you slow down. In the moments ahead, we'll drift through a calmer side of American history, following the unremarkable, peaceful routines of the first dogs who once moved quietly through the White House, resting, waiting, and napping as the world passed by. There's nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to stay awake for. Just allow your breathing to soften as the story unfolds at an unhurried pace. If these quiet stories help you rest, you're warmly welcome to subscribe so each night brings another gentle place to land. And if you feel like it, let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Many find comfort in knowing they're not falling asleep alone. Now, get comfortable. Let your shoulders relax, and allow sleep to arrive naturally and without effort.
Long before cameras waited outside gates, before press briefings filled the air, and before moments were measured in headlines and history books, the great house at the center of American life was, first and foremost, a home. And within that home, dogs lived not as symbols, but as companions. They were not thinking of legacy. They were not aware of ceremony. They did not know when a moment might later be remembered. They simply moved through rooms, one paw at a time, following warmth, routine, and familiarity. In the early mornings when the building was still quiet, these dogs often woke before anyone else noticed. Not because they were restless, but because habit had gently shaped their days. They rose when light changed, when distant footsteps passed down hallways, when familiar scents drifted through open doors. There was no urgency in their waking, only awareness. They stretched slowly. They shifted their weight. They listened. The floors beneath them were cool at first, then warmer as the sun climbed higher. Wooden boards held the faint memory of yesterday's footsteps. Rugs softened the sound of movement. Everything felt known. Everything felt expected. These dogs were not on display. They were not posed. Much of their time unfolded unseen, beyond the edges of official life. They slept through meetings. They dozed through quiet conversations. They waited patiently while the world outside moved forward at a faster pace than theirs. And waiting, for them, was not empty time. Waiting was the day. In rooms that would later be photographed and studied, dogs rested in corners that rarely caught attention, near doorways, beside chairs, under tables where shadows stayed steady. They learned which spots were warm in the morning and which stayed cool in the afternoon. They returned to the same places again and again, not because they were told to, but because comfort had a way of repeating itself. Their lives followed rhythms that did not need explanation. Morning brought gentle activity, short walks, quiet observation, the soft rustle of clothing as people prepared for the day. Dogs followed along, not always closely, but enough to remain part of the flow. Then, as the house settled into its daily patterns, the dogs settled too. Rest arrived naturally. They lay down without ceremony. Heads rested on paws. Eyes closed, not fully, but enough. Sounds faded into background texture, the hum of voices, the distant opening and closing of doors, the subtle echo of movement far away. Sleep came in pieces. A few minutes here, a longer stretch there. Always unannounced. No one marked these naps on schedules. No records were kept. And yet, these periods of rest filled most of the day, shaping it more than any single event ever could. In these moments, the dogs were simply present. They were neither working nor waiting for instruction. They were not performing loyalty or representing anything larger than themselves. They existed comfortably within the quiet spaces between activity. As hours passed, sunlight shifted across walls. Dust moved slowly through the air. The house breathed in its own way, expanding with movement, contracting with stillness. Dogs adjusted their positions without opening their eyes. A paw stretched. A tail flicked once, then went still. Occasionally, a sound would stir them. A voice from another room. Footsteps passing closer than usual. The soft clink of a bowl being set down. They would lift their heads briefly, assessing without concern, then return to rest. Nothing demanded urgency. Outside, the nation continued on. Inside, time softened. The dogs did not know who entered or exited the building. They did not track names or titles. They recognized patterns instead, the way mornings always felt the same, the way afternoons grew quiet, the way evenings brought slower movement and dimmer light. As the day unfolded, naps layered gently upon one another, creating a rhythm that never rushed and never paused completely. These dogs lived within that rhythm, guided by it rather than controlling it. They were part of the household, but not part of its formality. And because of that, their lives remained largely unnoticed. No announcements marked their routines. No documents described the way they preferred one hallway over another. or how they always returned to the same corner after walking. Yet these small choices shaped their days far more than any public moment ever could. As evening approached, the house began to change again. Lights softened, sounds grew fewer, movement slowed. Dogs sensed this without thinking. They repositioned themselves closer to familiar resting places, preparing for longer sleep. The day had not been remarkable. It had not been different, and that was exactly how it was meant to be in these unobserved hours. The dogs of the White House lived lives defined by repetition, comfort, and calm. They were present for history, but not shaped by it. Their routines remained steady, even as the world outside shifted and changed. And so, before there were photographs, before public fascination, before stories were told and retold, there were simply dogs resting quietly in a large, familiar house doing what they had always done, breathing slowly, sleeping lightly, living gently within the unnoticed spaces of the day. And as the house grew quieter still, their rest deepened and marked, uninterrupted and perfectly ordinary, just as it had been the day before, and the day before that. Inside the executive residence, where decisions were made and schedules were carefully arranged, there existed another rhythm, one far quieter, slower, and largely unnoticed. It was a rhythm shaped not by meetings or announcements, but by rest. Long before midday arrived, the house would already have settled into its familiar pattern. Activity came in waves. Movement rose and faded. Voices appeared and disappeared down corridors, and in between all of it, calm returned again and again. For the dogs who lived there, this rhythm felt natural. They did not measure time in hours or minutes. Instead, they sensed it through sound and light, the soft opening of curtains, the echo of footsteps becoming more frequent, then slowly tapering off. The shift in temperature as sunlight moved across rooms. Morning passed without urgency. After early activity, the house settled into a quieter stretch. It was during these hours that rest became most welcome. Dogs drifted toward corners that felt familiar, places they had chosen long ago, and returned to without thinking. Near walls where drafts were gentle, beside furniture that carried warmth, under desks where shadows remained steady. These were not designated sleeping areas, at least not officially. No one assigned them. They were simply discovered over time, chosen through repetition and comfort. Once found, they became part of the day's structure. Power naps, though never called that, were woven naturally into the hours. A dog might rest for a few minutes, awaken briefly, adjust position, and drift back again. There was no clear beginning or end. Rest flowed in and out like breathing. During these moments, the house continued on. Papers were handled quietly. Conversations softened. Doors closed with care. The dog sensed the mood and matched it, remaining still, as if aware that calm was expected. In these quiet corners, influence was not absent, it was simply paused. The presence of rest had its own effect. A sleeping dog nearby softened the room. It slowed movement. It reminded those passing through that not everything needed immediate attention. That stillness could exist alongside responsibility. As midday approached, light brightened certain rooms while others remained dim. Dogs learned these patterns well. They knew where the sun would land and when it would move on. They followed it sometimes, settling into warmth, then leaving it behind when it grew too strong. Rest adjusted itself accordingly. In one corner, a dog might sleep deeply, breathing slow and steady. In another, a lighter nap unfolded, ears twitching at distant sounds, eyes opening briefly, then closing again. These moments filled the spaces between tasks, creating a steady undercurrent of calm. No one announced when it was time to rest. No signal marked the transition. It simply happened, as naturally as the house itself, shifting tone throughout the day. The executive residence, despite its prominence, behaved like any other home in this way. It carried cycles of energy and quiet, of movement and pause, and the dogs moved within those cycles effortlessly. Afternoons stretched gently. Activity returned briefly, then softened again. Dogs adapted without hesitation. They relocated to new quiet corners as needed, choosing spots that matched the house's changing mood. A hallway that had been busy earlier now felt still. A room once filled with voices now held silence. A familiar chair cast a longer shadow. Each change signaled another opportunity for rest. These naps were not indulgent. They were practical. They allowed the day to unfold smoothly without strain. They kept the dogs balanced, unbothered by the constant motion that surrounded them. And perhaps without realizing it, the humans benefited too. A resting dog did not interrupt, did not demand attention. Yet its presence reminded others to slow down, to lower their voices, to move gently. Rest became contagious in the best possible way. As evening neared, the quality of rest changed. Naps grew longer. Movement slowed. The house prepared for its final transition of the day. Dogs sensed this before it fully arrived. They began gravitating toward spots that felt more permanent, places meant for deeper sleep. Corners near familiar rooms. Spaces where the night would remain undisturbed. The day's power naps blended seamlessly into evening rest. There was no clear boundary, only a gradual deepening of stillness. In this way, even the most influential home in the nation followed a pattern older than schedules or titles. A pattern shaped by rest, repetition, and quiet understanding. And in the soft corners of that house, dogs slept peacefully, unaware of influence, unconcerned with importance, fully at ease within the ordinary cycles of the day. Their rest was simple, their routine was steady, and the calm they carried lingered quietly in the rooms around them. As night settled in, those quiet corners remained holding warmth, stillness, and the gentle reminder that even power rests beneath the calm surface of each quiet day. There existed a structure so gentle, it was almost invisible. It was not written down. It was not enforced with clocks or commands. And yet, it guided every movement within the household, shaping the flow of time in a way that felt both dependable and kind. The structure grew slowly, formed by repetition rather than design. For the dogs who lived within the executive residence, routine was not something learned all at once. It developed gradually, day after day, through simple experiences that repeated themselves until they became familiar. A bowl appearing at the same time each morning, a door opening in the same way each afternoon, footsteps that followed similar paths, creating a sense of predictability that required no thought. Feeding came first, not as an event, but as a certainty. It happened when it always did. The dogs recognized it not by the position of the sun alone, but by the subtle cues that preceded it: the change in sound, the familiar movement of a caretaker, the gentle preparation that never rushed. Bowls were set down quietly. The clink of metal or ceramic was soft and reassuring. There was no competition, no urgency, just the calm presence of nourishment arriving as expected. Once feeding ended, the day continued without pause. The dogs did not linger at empty bowls for long. They understood, in their own way, that the next part of the routine would arrive when it always did. And so they moved on, untroubled. Walking followed its own pattern. Not long walks meant for exploration, but familiar routes that repeated day after day. Always. Paths just outside. Small loops that required no decision-making. These walks were not about distance or discovery. They were about continuity. The dogs knew where each turn would lead. They anticipated pauses. They recognized when movement would end and rest would begin again. These walks provided just enough activity to gently reset the body. Muscles stretched. Breathing deepened. Then, almost naturally, the pull towards stillness returned. Rest followed without instruction. Dogs settled where they always had, choosing spots that felt right not just physically, but rhythmically. Near a wall, beside a chair, in a corner that had quietly earned their trust over time. They lay down slowly, without urgency, allowing the day to move around them. For the humans in the house, these routines offered comfort as well. Caretakers did not need to think deeply about timing. The dog's behavior guided them. A glance was enough to know when rest was needed, when movement would be welcome, when feeding should happen again. The predictability removed uncertainty. It softened the edges of responsibility. In the shared structure, everyone relaxed. The dogs, secure in knowing what came next, showed no signs of restlessness. The humans, supported by a rhythm that worked, moved through their tasks with greater ease. The household functioned not because it was rigid, but because it was consistent. As days passed, these routines layered upon one another. Morning fed into afternoon. Afternoon eased into evening. Each transition happened gently, without sharp edges. The dogs adapted seamlessly, adjusting their energy without effort. They did not resist rest. They welcomed it. Nap times were not fixed, but they were reliable. A dog might rest after walking, then rise briefly, then settle again. These small cycles repeated throughout the day, creating a pattern that felt steady rather than strict. Sleep was not forced. It arrived naturally, guided by habit. These moments of rest filled much of the day, but they never felt empty. The dogs remained aware of their surroundings even while resting. Ears responded to familiar sounds. Breathing slowed, but attention lingered softly. In this way, stillness became active in its own quiet form. The structure beneath the stillness did not demand perfection. It allowed flexibility. If something changed, a delay, a shift in sound, a moment of disruption, the dogs adjusted easily. The foundation was strong enough to absorb small variations without breaking. That strength came from repetition, not control. Evenings brought their own familiar signals. Lights dimmed gradually. Voices softened. Movement slowed. Dogs responded by settling more deeply, preparing for longer rest. The structure of the day gently guided them toward sleep without command. By nightfall, Everything felt complete. Though nothing had been formally concluded, the routines that shaped the day required no reflection. They simply existed, steady and reassuring. They carried the household forward, one calm cycle at a time. And so, beneath the quiet surface of stillness, structure lived unseen but deeply felt. It offered comfort not through excitement or change, but through reliability. Through knowing that what had happened yesterday would happen again tomorrow. In much the same way for the dogs, the structure meant peace for the humans. It meant ease. And for the house itself, it meant balance, a gentle harmony built not on urgency, but on routine, repetition, and rest. As the night settled in fully, the structure did not disappear. It simply rested too, ready to return with the next familiar morning, unchanged and quietly dependable, long before the White House became a place of constant record. Before photographs captured every corner and schedules were preserved in careful detail, the building existed in a quieter state. It was still important, still central, but it was also unmistakably domestic. And within that domestic calm, the earliest presidential pets lived lives that unfolded softly, without documentation or expectation. In those early years, the house itself seemed to breathe more slowly. Wooden floors creaked gently beneath measured footsteps. Doors closed without urgency. Windows were open to let in air rather than sound. The pace of life inside followed daylight more than clocks, and the presence of animals fit naturally into that rhythm. Dogs moved through these spaces without drawing attention. They were not introduced or announced. They simply appeared where they belonged, resting near warmth, following familiar paths, settling into corners that felt safe. Their sleeping arrangements were not planned with intention. There were no designated beds, no specialized spaces. Instead, rest found them wherever comfort lingered longest, near hearths that held warmth even after flames had faded, beside sturdy furniture that anchored the room, along walls where drafts were minimal and shadows remained still. At night, the house quieted completely. Without electric light, evenings dimmed gradually. Candles flickered and were eventually extinguished. Sounds softened, then disappeared altogether. Dogs sensed these transitions with ease. As activity slowed, they followed suit, lowering themselves onto wooden floors that had grown familiar beneath their bodies. Sleep arrived not as a destination, but as a continuation of stillness. In those early times, the White House was less a symbol and more a residence shaped by routine. Domestic life unfolded quietly, and animals were woven into it without ceremony. Dogs rested while conversations drifted around them. They slept while footsteps passed nearby. They remained undisturbed by the quiet importance of the people they lived beside. No one wrote down where the dogs slept, but the floors remembered. Certain boards carried the subtle impression of repeated rest. Certain corners became known through use rather than designation. Over time, these spaces developed a sense of belonging not because they were claimed, but because they were returned to again and again. Morning light entered slowly, stretching across rooms in narrow bands. Dogs woke gradually, lifting their heads before their bodies followed. They stretched, shifted, and remained still for a moment longer, listening to the house awaken around them. The sounds of early life were gentle. The opening of shutters, the movement of fabric, the distant murmur of voices not yet fully formed into conversation. Dogs observed these changes without concern. They had experienced them countless times before. During the day, rest came in quiet intervals. A dog might nap through the warmth of midday, breathing slow and steady on a patch of sunlit floor. Another might choose a shaded corner where the air stayed cool. These choices were made without thought, guided entirely by comfort and familiarity. There was no separation between living and resting. The two blended seamlessly. Activity rose briefly, then faded. Stillness returned without announcement. Dogs adjusted their positions as needed, never fully leaving the calm that defined their days. The lack of documentation allowed these routines to remain untouched. No one interfered. No one corrected. The dogs' habits were accepted as part of the household's natural flow. They were present, but never intrusive. Their quiet existence added softness to the rooms they occupied. Evenings brought a deeper stillness. As light faded, dogs gravitated toward familiar nighttime spaces, near walls, under tables, beside chairs where they had rested countless nights before. Wooden floors cooled beneath them, but their familiarity provided comfort. The house seemed to settle alongside them. In these moments, the boundary between the animal and the home blurred. The dogs belonged not because they were owned, but because they fit so naturally into the rhythm of the place. Their presence required no adjustment. It simply existed. Without modern records, these early routines remain largely imagined, but their simplicity makes them easy to understand. They mirrored the life of the house itself, steady, quiet, and grounded in repetition. Sleep came early and lasted long, Dogs breathe evenly in the darkness, unaware of time passing. The house held their rest gently, undisturbed by the outside world. In these hours, everything felt balanced. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing needed to change. Morning would return as it always did. Light would reappear. Sounds would resume, and the dogs would wake, stretch, and begin the day once more, following the same paths, resting in the same places, living within the same calm routine. These early White House whispers never reached beyond the walls that held them. They were not preserved in writing or memory, yet they formed the foundation for all that followed, a reminder that before history was recorded, it was lived quietly. And on those wooden floors, in those unremarkable corners, dogs slept peacefully, unaware that their stillness was part of something enduring, something steady, something deeply human. As the day unfolded again, calm returned as it always did, and the house, unchanged in its essence, continued to shelter both rest and routine, just as it had from the very beginning. Over the decades, as the executive residence subtly changed in form and feeling, so did the spaces where dogs found their rest. These changes were never sudden. They did not arrive with announcements or plans. Instead, they unfolded quietly, shaped by architecture, habit, and the simple, unspoken needs of animals living within formal surroundings. In the earliest years, resting spaces were practical by necessity. Dogs slept where there was room, warmth, and shelter. Kennel-like areas, sometimes separate, sometimes only loosely defined, offered protection from weather and a sense of order within the household. These spaces were modest, uncomplicated, and functional. They existed not to impress, but to serve. Yet even then, dogs did not confine themselves entirely to designated spots. They wandered inward, drawn by warmth and familiarity. When allowed, they settled near hearths or along walls inside the house. These moments marked the beginning of a gradual shift, one that moved canine rest closer to the center of daily life. As the building itself evolved, so did expectations. Architectural changes introduced larger rooms, softer surfaces, and spaces designed for comfort as much as formality. Carpets replaced bare floors in certain areas. Furniture became more inviting. With these changes came new opportunities for rest. Dogs adapted naturally. They discovered how carpet held warmth differently than wood, how cushions softened joints, how rooms designed for quiet conversation also offered ideal conditions for uninterrupted sleep. They chose spots that balanced comfort with familiarity, returning to them day after day. No one needed to instruct them. The house taught them where to rest. As decades passed, the distinction between indoor and outdoor spaces softened. Dogs became more fully integrated into the household. Kennels remained useful, but they were no longer the sole places for rest. Interior rooms became part of the dog's daily routine, offering protection from noise and weather alike. The shift reflected changing attitudes as well. Dogs were increasingly seen not just as working animals or companions, but as members of the household. Their comfort mattered. Their routines were respected. Quiet accommodations were made without fuss. Resting areas became more intentional, though still understated. A rug placed near a wall, a chair left unoccupied, a corner that remained undisturbed. These spaces were not labeled or claimed. They were simply understood. Dogs returned to them instinctively, knowing where calm lingered longest. Formal surroundings did not prevent the softness. Even in rooms designed for ceremony, dogs found their places. Beneath tables where shadows stayed consistent, beside furniture that blocked drafts, near doors that allowed them to sense movement without being in the way. Their presence did not disrupt the formality. It softened it. As household preferences shifted, so did canine spaces. Some areas became quieter, others grew busier. Dogs responded by adjusting their resting patterns, moving with the flow rather than resisting it. They learned which rooms remained calm during the day and which were best avoided. They chose resting places that aligned with the house's natural rhythms, always favoring predictability. Carpets played a subtle but meaningful role in this evolution. Soft underfoot, they absorbed sound and warmth. Dogs gravitated toward them instinctively, settling where the texture offered comfort. Over time, these carpeted areas became familiar rest zones, used so often that they felt permanent even when furniture changed. Despite these shifts, one thing remained constant. Rest was never forced. Dogs were free to choose where they slept. Their preferences guided caretakers, not the other way around. If a dog returned to the same spot repeatedly, it was respected. If it moved on, the space was left unchanged. This quiet respect allowed routines to remain stable even as surroundings evolved. Evenings highlighted these changes most clearly. As light dimmed and activity slowed, dogs selected their nighttime resting places with care. Some preferred open spaces. Others chose enclosed corners. The options had expanded over time. but the decision-making process remained the same, guided by comfort, familiarity, and habit. The evolution from kennels to carpets was not about luxury. It was about integration. Dogs became part of the living space, not separate from it. The rest unfolded alongside human routines, woven gently into the fabric of daily life. And through all these changes, the dogs remained unchanged in what they sought: a quiet place, a familiar surface, a predictable rhythm. The house responded by offering those things in new forms, without ever drawing attention to the shift. As decades passed, these evolving spaces became part of the residence's unspoken language, a language understood through repetition rather than explanation. And in those spaces, whether simple or refined, dogs rested peacefully. They slept through renovations, through changing decor, through the steady passage of time. Their routines adapted, but their calm remained. From kennels to carpets, from practicality to quiet comfort, the resting places told a story not of change, but of continuity, of a household learning, slowly and gently, how to make room for rest wherever it naturally belonged. As night settled once more, dogs curled into familiar spaces, breathing evenly, surrounded by the quiet assurance that wherever they chose to rest, the house would hold them just the same. Morning arrived quietly in the executive residence, not with urgency, but with a gradual easing into wakefulness. Light filtered in through tall windows, touching the edges of rooms before fully settling. Sounds appeared slowly, one at a time, never all at once. And within this gentle beginning, the dogs of the house stirred in their own unhurried way. They did not leap up at the first sign of day. They did not rush toward movement. Instead, they lingered in stillness for a few moments longer, sensing the shift rather than reacting to it. A stretch came first, a slow extension of legs, a gentle arch of the back, then a pause. Heads lifted briefly, ears attentive but relaxed. The house was waking, but it was not yet awake. That distinction mattered. Morning activity unfolded in small, contained movements. Short walks through familiar hallways, a step outside into cooler air, a brief moment of alertness as scents and sounds registered. These periods of movement were never long. They were not meant to exhaust or excite. They served only to gently mark the start of the day. Dogs followed these routines with ease. They had learned over time that morning did not demand energy, only participation. A few minutes of motion were enough to reset the body, to remind muscles and joints of their purpose. And once that reminder was complete, the pull of rest returned naturally. Rest was not something that followed activity as a reward. It was simply the next step. After movement came stillness, as reliably as breath follows breath. Dogs drifted back toward familiar resting places, corners warmed by early light, rugs that held comfort, spots near walls where the world felt contained. They settled down without ceremony, as if this return to rest was the true purpose of the morning. And in many ways, it was. These naps were not accidental. They were expected. The structure of the day allowed for them. No one disturbed them. No one hurried them along. The house itself seemed to encourage this rhythm, softening its sounds and slowing its pace as the dogs rested. Morning naps were light, but restorative. Eyes closed, then opened briefly. Breathing slowed, but awareness remained. A distant sound might prompt a small shift in position, but not a full waking. These moments of rest were woven seamlessly into the fabric of the morning, neither noticed nor remarked upon. Humans moved around them carefully, guided by familiarity rather than instruction. They knew which spaces were often occupied by resting dogs. They stepped quietly. They adjusted their paths slightly. Rest was respected without being announced. This mutual understanding created ease. As the morning progressed, another brief period of activity might arise. A short walk, a change of room, a moment of interaction. Then, once again, rest followed. The pattern repeated itself gently, without deviation. Movement and stillness existed not as opposites, but as partners. Each gave meaning to the other. Activity remained calm because rest was never far away. Rest remained deep because movement was measured and brief. Together, they created a steady rhythm that guided the entire household. Dogs understood this rhythm instinctively. They did not resist rest. They did not seek constant engagement. They trusted that the day would unfold as it always had, with no surprises and no demands beyond the familiar. Late morning brought slightly brighter light and a subtle shift in energy. Activity increased briefly, then softened again. Dogs adjusted without effort, repositioning themselves as light moved across the floor. A nap might deepen. Another might begin. Time passed quietly. There was no sense of interruption when a dog lay down. No moment where rest felt like a pause in productivity. Instead, rest was part of the structure, expected, welcomed, and fully integrated into the day. This approach shaped behavior gently. Dogs remained calm because they were never overstimulated. They rested because rest was available. They moved when needed and stopped when movement had served its purpose. The balance required no correction. As midday approached, the morning naps blended into longer periods of stillness. The transition was seamless. Dogs slept more deeply now, breathing slow and steady, bodies fully relaxed. The house accommodated this deepening calm. Sounds softened further. Movements became fewer. The day settled into its quieter phase, carried forward by the same rhythm that had begun at dawn. Morning activity had done its work. It had not exhausted. It had not excited. It had simply prepared the body for rest. And rest arrived exactly as expected. In this way, the day unfolded without resistance. Dogs moved gently through its early hours, guided not by clocks or commands, but by an internal understanding shaped by routine. The gentle pull of rest was never denied. It followed each small effort, each brief moment of alertness, reminding everyone within the house that stillness was not only allowed, it was essential. And as the morning faded into midday, the dogs slept on, undisturbed, secure in the knowledge that when they woke again, the rhythm would continue, unchanged and quietly dependable. Midday arrived without ceremony. There was no bell to announce it, no clear moment when morning officially ended and afternoon began. Instead, the light simply reached a certain angle. The air settled into a steadier temperature, and the house eased into a quieter state that felt neither active nor inactive, just present. This was the pause no one noticed. For the dogs, it was the most natural part of the day. After the gentle movements of morning and the soft return to rest, midday unfolded like a long breath held comfortably. The house continued its work, but at a lower volume. Conversations were quieter now. Footsteps were fewer and more deliberate. Doors opened and closed with care. And in the midst of it all, dogs rested. They did not seek attention. They did not wait for instruction. They simply remained where they were. Some lay stretched out along cool floors, their bodies fully relaxed, chest rising and falling in slow, even rhythms. Others curled into familiar shapes beside furniture, tucking paws beneath themselves as if settling into something timeless. Their eyes stayed closed, not tightly, but with the ease of sleep that knows it will not be interrupted. Midday rest was deeper than morning rest. The body, having moved and settled more than once already, now welcomed stillness fully. Muscles softened, breathing slowed further. Even the smallest adjustments an ear flick. A tail shift became rare. Dogs slept not because they were tired, but because there was nothing else required of them. Around them, the house continued quietly. Staff moved from room to room, attending to tasks that required focus but not urgency. Papers were handled gently. Objects were placed down rather than dropped. Voices remained low, as if the presence of resting animals set an unspoken tone. No one paused their work to acknowledge this stillness. It did not interrupt productivity. It existed alongside it, unnoticed yet influential. The midday pause asked nothing. It did not demand participation. It did not invite reaction. It simply allowed everything to slow without stopping. Dogs embodied this perfectly. They did not perform rest. They did not settle dramatically or sigh loudly. They lay still in the quiet confidence that nothing would disturb them. Their presence was so natural that it blended into the environment, becoming part of the room rather than an occupant within it. Light during midday was steady and unchanging. It no longer crept or stretched. It simply existed, filling spaces evenly. Dogs did not chase it now. They remained where they had settled earlier, trusting that comfort would last. Shadows stayed predictable. Sounds remained distant. Time moved differently in these hours. Minutes passed unnoticed. There was no reason to count them. The dog's sleep did not measure itself in duration, only in depth. Awareness faded, but never disappeared entirely. Familiar sounds might register briefly, then dissolve again. The house seemed to understand this rhythm. Movements avoided certain paths instinctively. People stepped around resting forms without thought, as if those spaces had always been meant to remain undisturbed. No signs marked these resting areas. Habit alone preserved them. Midday did not bring change. It brought continuation. The dogs remained exactly where they were, and that was enough. Their presence carried a quiet reassurance. It suggested that not every moment needed direction, that being present without purpose was acceptable. It softened the edges of the day, creating space for calm to exist without explanation. Even as work continued, a sense of ease settled over the house. Tasks were completed steadily. Conversations ended naturally. Nothing rushed forward. Nothing lagged behind. The pause held everything in balance. For the dogs, this balance required no effort. They slept deeply now, bodies fully surrendered to rest. Breathing was slow and steady, almost imperceptible. The world beyond their immediate space faded completely, leaving only the familiar weight of the floor beneath them and the quiet consistency of the room. If someone passed nearby, the dogs did not stir. They trusted the environment. They trusted the routine. They trusted that midday would pass as it always did, quietly and without disruption. As the hours moved on, subtle changes began to appear. Light shifted slightly, just enough to signal that afternoon would eventually return. Sounds grew marginally more frequent. A distant door closed. Footsteps echoed faintly. Still, the dogs remained asleep, unaffected by these early signs of transition. The pause lingered. This was the heart of the day, yet it was the least remarkable. No events defined it. No memories attached themselves to it, and that was precisely why it mattered. Midday offered rest without expectation. It allowed the dogs to exist without responding, to sleep without guarding, to be present without awareness. The rest did not serve a function beyond itself, and in that simplicity, something rare took place. The house rested too. Not completely, not entirely, but enough. Enough to soften, enough to slow, enough to make the remainder of the day feel manageable. As afternoon eventually approached, the dogs would wake slowly, as they always did. There would be no sudden movement, no abrupt transition, just a gradual return to awareness, guided by the same rhythm that had carried them through every other part of the day. But for now, midday remained still, quiet, unnoticed. And in that pause, the dogs slept on, held gently by routine, surrounded by calm, asking nothing of the world and needing nothing in return. As years passed and the executive residence grew more defined in its purpose, the household itself began to adopt a quieter kind of structure, one that did not announce itself, but slowly settled into place. This structure was not rigid or demanding. Instead, it offered consistency, and within that consistency, routines took root. For the dogs who lived there, this shift felt natural. The house had always followed rhythms, but now those rhythms became more regular, more dependable. Morning unfolded in familiar ways. Midday softened predictably. Evening slowed without surprise. And nestled gently between these transitions were periods of rest that came to be expected, rather than accidental. Nap times were not scheduled on paper, but they were deeply ingrained. Dogs learned when the house would grow quieter, when movement would slow, when voices would soften. These cues repeated day after day, forming a reliable pattern that required no interpretation. Rest followed naturally, guided by the steady pace of institutional life. The formality of the household did not disrupt these routines. It refined them. With greater structure came greater predictability. Certain rooms remained calm at specific times. Certain paths were walked daily. Certain sounds always preceded stillness. Dogs recognized these patterns intuitively and aligned their rest accordingly. They did not resist this structure. They leaned into it. As the household grew more organized, so did the flow of the day. Activity rose and fell in measured waves, leaving generous spaces for calm. Dogs rested deeply within these spaces, knowing they would not be interrupted. Their naps became longer and more regular. Morning brought light rest. Midday offered deeper sleep. Afternoon allowed quiet alertness, followed by another gentle pause. These cycles mirrored the house itself, which moved steadily rather than sporadically. The predictability created ease for everyone within its walls, for caretakers. This routine simplified responsibility. They did not need to guess when dogs required rest. The rhythm was clear. Dogs settled at the same times, in the same places, day after day. This consistency removed uncertainty and allowed attention to be given quietly, without disruption. Rest was respected not because it was enforced, but because it fit so naturally into the flow of the household. Dogs found comfort in this predictability. They did not need to watch for change. They did not anticipate interruption. They trusted the rhythm completely. When rest arrived, they accepted it without hesitation. When it ended, they rose gently and without resistance. This trust created calm. The formal nature of the residence, often associated with order and ceremony, revealed a softer side through these routines. Beneath the structure lived a steady, unhurried pace that supported rest as much as responsibility. Even the architecture reinforced this rhythm. Large rooms absorbed sound. Thick walls held quiet. Long hallways allowed movement without disturbance. Dogs chose resting places that aligned with these features, returning to them consistently. Their presence did not disrupt formality. It complemented it. As days passed, routines became almost invisible. They required no reminders. Everyone moved within them effortlessly, guided by familiarity rather than instruction. Dogs slept through meetings. They dozed through transitions. They remained undisturbed by the steady hum of institutional life. Their naps were not indulgent. They were essential. They allowed the dogs to remain balanced, calm, and present. And in doing so, they added to the overall steadiness of the household. Evenings followed predictably. Light dimmed. Activity slowed. Dogs settled into longer rest, preparing for the quiet of night. The day closed as it always had, without urgency, without disruption. The rise of routine did not diminish warmth. It enhanced it. By providing structure, the household made space for rest to exist fully. Dogs responded by embracing that space, resting deeply and regularly within it. And so, within a formal residence known for its importance, something remarkably ordinary thrived. A steady pace, predictable rest, quiet trust. The routines that shaped the day did not demand attention, but they offered comfort. And in those predictable pauses, dogs slept peacefully, mirroring the calm, measured rhythm of the house itself. As night settled in once more, the routine held firm, ready to repeat again with the next familiar morning, unchanged and reassuring in its quiet reliability. Within the steady rhythm of the household, there were people whose presence rarely drew attention, yet whose influence shaped every quiet moment of comfort. They did not stand at the center of the day. They moved along its edges, gently guiding it without leaving marks behind. These were the handlers and caretakers, the ones who understood that calm did not need instruction, only consistency. Their work was quiet by nature. They spoke softly, not because silence was required, but because softness worked. Dogs responded not to volume, but to tone. A familiar voice, spoken evenly, carried reassurance. Over time, these voices became part of the environment, recognized, trusted, and never questioned. Commands were rare. Urgency was unnecessary. Instead, communication happened through repetition. The same words used in the same moments. The same gestures made without emphasis. A door opened slowly. A bowl placed down gently. A hand extended without insistence. Dogs learn these signals not through training sessions, but through daily life unfolding predictably. The caretakers understood this instinctively. They observed more than they directed. They noticed when a dog preferred one resting place over another, when it settled earlier in the day, when it lingered longer in the afternoon. These observations were never recorded. They simply informed behavior. If a dog chose a corner to rest, that corner remained undisturbed. If a dog lingered near a doorway, paths shifted quietly around it. If rest arrived early, nothing hurried it away. This was the language of calm. It relied on familiarity rather than force. It trusted that routines, once established, would guide behavior naturally. Dogs did not need reminders. They needed continuity. Caretakers moved through the house with an awareness shaped by repetition. They knew which spaces were often occupied by resting dogs and adjusted their steps accordingly. They did not pause dramatically or draw attention. They simply moved gently, as if the calm itself were part of the structure. Tone mattered more than words. A soft greeting signaled safety. A familiar phrase suggested it was time to move. A quiet presence conveyed reassurance without explanation. Dogs responded by remaining relaxed, secure in the understanding that nothing unexpected would occur. The absence of urgency shaped the entire environment. No one rushed through tasks. No one startled sleeping animals. Caretakers allowed moments to unfold at their own pace. If a dog was slow to rise, it was allowed. If it returned to rest immediately after moving, that was accepted. This patience was not indulgent. It was practical. Dogs who felt secure rested more deeply. Dogs who trusted their environment remained calm. And calm, once established, sustained itself. Over time, this quiet communication became effortless. Caretakers no longer needed to think consciously about how to interact. Their movements aligned naturally with the dog's routines. They anticipated needs without rushing to meet them. They recognized when rest was preferable to activity and allowed it to take precedence. This created a sense of mutual ease. Dogs did not look to caretakers for constant guidance. They relied on the rhythm instead. The caretakers, in turn, trusted the dogs to follow familiar patterns without intervention. The result was a household that moved smoothly, without friction. Even during busy periods, the language of calm remained intact. Caretakers lowered their voices. Movement slowed slightly. The presence of resting dogs subtly shaped behavior, reminding everyone to maintain the tone that had proven effective. This approach required attention, but not effort. It was not something that could be rushed or replicated quickly. It developed through time spent together, through days that unfolded similarly enough to build trust. Caretakers did not seek recognition for this work. Their success was measured in the absence of disruption, in the way dogs slept undisturbed, in the way routines held steady regardless of change. Evenings highlighted this relationship most clearly. As the day wound down, caretakers mirrored the dog's slowing pace. Voices softened further. Lights dimmed gradually. Movements became fewer. The house responded to this shared understanding by settling into deeper quiet. Dogs sensed this shift and responded by preparing for longer rest. They moved to familiar nighttime spaces, guided by habit rather than instruction. Caretakers observed without interference. They ensured doors were closed gently. They avoided unnecessary noise. They allowed the night to arrive naturally. This mutual respect between humans and animals formed the foundation of calm within the household. It required no reinforcement. It demanded no correction. It simply continued. The language of calm did not fade with time. It strengthened as routines repeated, trust deepened. Dogs rested more fully. Caretakers moved more confidently. The house itself seemed to hold this understanding, preserving it within its walls. In this quiet partnership, comfort was maintained without spectacle. Dogs slept peacefully, guided by familiarity rather than command. Caretakers moved through their tasks with ease, supported by routines that worked, and within that shared calm. The day unfolded gently, one familiar moment at a time, and changed. Unhurried and quietly complete, every house, no matter how large or formal, develops places that feel different from the rest. Not because they are labeled or announced, but because they quietly earn a sense of belonging. Within the executive residence, these places existed as well, small pockets of comfort discovered over time and returned to again and again. For the dogs who lived there, these spots became anchors in the day, chosen not by decision, but by habit. A patch of sunlight on the floor was often the first to be claimed. In the morning hours, light slipped through tall windows and settled briefly in predictable places. The dogs learned these patterns without effort. They knew where warmth would appear and how long it would last. When the sun touched a familiar spot, they moved toward it slowly, lowering themselves into the light as if it had been waiting just for them. There was no rush. They turned once, sometimes twice, then settled. The warmth spread gradually across their bodies. Muscles softened, breathing slowed, eyes closed partway, then fully. The sun did its quiet work, and the dogs remained still, letting it pass over them. As the light shifted, so did they. Not abruptly, not with urgency, just enough to remain comfortable. When the warmth faded, they did not follow it far. Instead, they returned to another familiar place, one that offered a different kind of comfort. Shaded hallways became favorites as the day grew brighter. These spaces held cooler air and steady quiet. Sounds passed through them without lingering. Footsteps echoed softly, then disappeared. Dogs rested along the edges, close enough to remain aware, far enough to feel undisturbed. The floor beneath them felt cool and solid. The walls nearby offered a sense of enclosure. These hallways were not destinations. They were passages. And yet, they provided exactly what was needed. Rest without isolation. Awareness without demand. Dogs returned to these shaded places often, choosing the same stretch of floor day after day. Over time, the space seemed to recognize them. It felt familiar in a way that dogs returned to these shaded places often, choosing the same stretch of floor day after day. Over time, the space seemed to recognize them. It felt familiar in a way that required no explanation. Quiet rooms offered another kind of refuge. Rooms used less frequently held a deeper stillness. Air remained unchanged. Light was softer. Sound rarely entered. Dogs discovered these rooms gradually, sometimes following a caretaker, sometimes wandering in on their own. Once found, these rooms became dependable. They offered uninterrupted rest, especially during the calm hours of midday. Dogs slept deeply there, breathing slow and even, bodies fully relaxed. These rooms asked nothing of them. They existed simply to hold stillness. No sign marked these spots as special. They were not prepared. They were not reserved. They were simply chosen, and once chosen, they became part of the day's rhythm. Dogs returned to the same places not because they remembered choosing them, but because familiarity guided them back. The body recognized comfort before the mind engaged. Paws carried them to the same corners without hesitation. This repetition created predictability. Caretakers learned these preferences quietly. They noticed where dogs settled most often. They adjusted their movements around these spaces, preserving their calm without discussion. Over time, these resting spots became unofficially designated not by rule, but by respect. Favorite shadows played their role as furniture cast long shapes across the floor. Dogs found comfort within them. Shadows offered a sense of enclosure without confinement. They softened light and dampened visual movement. Dogs rested within these shapes, feeling sheltered without being hidden. The shadows moved slowly across the room as the day progressed. Dogs did not follow them closely. They allowed the light to change around them, remaining still as long as comfort lasted. Habit guided everything. Dogs did not test new spaces often. Once a spot proved reliable, it became part of the routine. The floor there felt right. The air moved gently. Sounds passed without intrusion. There was no reason to search elsewhere. These preferences remained consistent across days. Morning brought sunlit patches. Midday favored shade and quiet rooms. Afternoon allowed longer rest where shadows deepened. Evenings returned dogs to familiar nighttime spaces. places that held darkness gently and promised uninterrupted rest. The house supported this pattern naturally. Its size allowed choice. Its layout provided variety. Dogs selected from these options instinctively, aligning their rest with the environment's subtle offerings. No one rearranged furniture to accommodate them. No one created barriers or instructions. The dogs adapted to the house as it was, and the house, in turn, accepted their presence without resistance. Over time, these designated spots became part of the household's invisible map. People knew where to expect resting dogs. Paths adjusted subtly. Movement softened. The presence of these quiet resting places shaped behavior without instruction. Dogs slept deeply in these spots because they trusted them. They trusted that light would change gradually. They trusted that sound would remain distant. They trusted that no one would disturb them unnecessarily. This trust allowed rest to be complete. Even when activity increased elsewhere in the house, these spots remained calm. They were buffered by distance, by walls, by habit. Dogs remained asleep as conversations passed far away, as doors opened and closed in other rooms. Time passed gently in these spaces. Minutes blended into hours. There was no reason to mark them. The dog's breathing remained slow and steady, bodies rising and falling in quiet rhythm. Occasionally, a paw shifted, a head adjusted, then stillness returned. The simplicity of these moments defined much of the day. Nothing dramatic happened here. No events unfolded. Yet these quiet hours shaped the dog's well-being more than anything else. Rest restored balance. Familiarity offered security. As evening approached, these spots gradually emptied. Dogs rose slowly, stretching without urgency. They moved toward their nighttime resting places, guided by the same habits that had shaped their day. The designated spots had done their work. They would be ready again tomorrow. In this way, the house held many resting places, each serving its purpose quietly. Sunlit patches, shaded hallways, quiet rooms, familiar shadows, chosen not once, but repeatedly. And in these spaces, dogs rested without thought, carried by habit, comfort, and the gentle assurance that wherever they settled, calm would follow. As the day moved quietly past its midpoint, the house entered a slower phase, one that did not announce itself, but could be felt in subtle ways. Lights softened, sounds grew fewer, movement became more deliberate. The afternoon did not end abruptly. Instead, it gently loosened its hold, allowing the evening to approach at its own unhurried pace. For the dogs, this transition felt familiar. They sensed it not through clocks or cues, but through the gradual change in atmosphere. The warmth of the afternoon settled into steadier tones. Shadows lengthened along walls and across floors. The house seemed to exhale, releasing the last traces of activity without replacing them with anything new. Naps that had begun earlier in the day now deepened. What had once been light rest, eyes half closed, ears attentive, became fuller sleep. Breathing slowed further. Bodies relaxed more completely. Dogs shifted less often, remaining settled in the places they had chosen hours before. There was no moment when rest changed into something else. It simply expanded. The afternoon drift allowed these naps to stretch naturally, blending into longer periods of stillness. Dogs did not wake because time had passed. They woke only if comfort required adjustment, and even then, the change was minimal. A slight repositioning, a quiet sigh, then sleep resumed. The house supported this deepening calm. Footsteps softened as if guided by instinct. Conversations, when they occurred, stayed low and brief. Doors closed gently. The environment seemed aware of the transition, responding without conscious effort. Afternoon light moved slowly now. Sunlit patches that had been warm earlier grew dimmer, then disappeared altogether. Dogs who had rested in those spots did not follow the light as they might have in the morning. Instead, they remained where they were, trusting that comfort would continue even without warmth. Shadows stretched across familiar rooms, settling into their evening shapes. These shapes felt reassuring, signaling that the day was moving toward rest rather than away from it. The dogs remained asleep through these changes. The rest no longer felt like a pause between activities. It felt like preparation. The body knew that little more would be required before night arrived. Energy conserved itself naturally, occasionally. A dog stirred just enough to become aware of the shifting light. Eyes opened briefly, ears adjusted. Then awareness faded again, replaced by deeper sleep. The afternoon drift asked nothing. It did not hurry. It did not interrupt. It simply carried the day forward gently. As time passed, the house grew quieter still. Some rooms fell completely silent. Others held only distant sounds, footsteps far away, the faint movement of air. These sounds did not intrude. They blended into the background, becoming part of the calm rather than breaking it. Dogs slept on. Their breathing remained steady and slow, bodies fully at ease. The familiarity of their surroundings allowed them to rest without vigilance. They trusted the routine completely. The transition toward evening did not require action. There was no need to move dogs to new spaces or signal that rest should deepen. It happened on its own, guided by the steady rhythm that had shaped every part of the day. Late afternoon brought a subtle cooling of the air. Dogs adjusted without waking fully, shifting slightly to maintain comfort. Their sleep remained unbroken. The house responded by holding its quiet, preserving the stillness that had settled in. As evening approached, the quality of rest changed again. Sleep became heavier, more sustained. Dogs no longer drifted in and out. They remained still for longer stretches, breathing deep and even. The day's activity, modest as it had been, faded completely from awareness. The house prepared for night in its own way. Lights dimmed gradually. Movement slowed further. The sense of closure arrived without ceremony. Everything felt complete, though nothing had been formally concluded. Dogs sensed this completion without waking. Their bodies settled fully into the spaces beneath them. Muscles relaxed. Breathing found its deepest rhythm. The rest they had been building toward all day had finally arrived. Evening did not replace afternoon. It absorbed it. The naps that had begun earlier did not end. They simply extended, becoming the foundation for nighttime sleep. There was no sharp boundary, no disruption, just continuity. The house held this moment gently. Nothing needed attention. Nothing demanded response. The day had done what it needed to do, and now it was releasing its hold. As darkness gathered outside, inside remained calm and steady. Dogs slept on, unaware of time passing, secure in the familiarity of their surroundings. The afternoon drift had done its work. It had carried the day forward without interruption, allowing rest to deepen naturally. And as night settled in fully, the dogs remained at ease, breathing slowly, sleeping soundly, guided by a rhythm that required no effort and promised no surprises. Just rest, quiet, complete, an unremarkable dot, and exactly as it was meant to be. And yet, within the executive residence, these changes did not arrive as interruptions. They settled in softly, refining what already existed rather than replacing it. The dogs noticed very little difference. Their days continued to unfold with the same calm rhythm that had always guided them. Morning brought light. Midday offered stillness. Evening eased everything toward rest. The structure remained intact, steady and familiar. Even as understanding deepened quietly around it, modern knowledge did not demand complexity. It did not insist on strict schedules or constant stimulation. Instead, it affirmed what routine had already shown to be true, that predictability supported comfort, that rest restored balance, and that gentleness worked better than urgency. These ideas fit naturally into the household. Caregivers became more attentive to subtle cues. They noticed changes in posture, breathing, and movement. They recognized when rest should be protected and when brief activity was enough. But they did not impose new demands. They simply responded with greater awareness. The dogs remained at ease. Their naps were not shortened or rearranged. Their resting places were not disrupted. Instead, small adjustments were made around them. A quieter corner preserved. A softer surface offered. A draft avoided. These refinements happened almost invisibly, blending into the existing routine. Nothing felt imposed. Contemporary understanding emphasized consistency. And consistency was already present. Dogs thrived not because their days were filled with variety, but because they were filled with familiarity. This principle guided every decision without needing to be spoken aloud. Rest remained central. Naps were still expected parts of the day, not interruptions. The timing of rest continued to align with the natural ebb and flow of the household. When the environment softened, the dogs settled. When movement returned, they rose gently. Modern care encouraged this balance rather than challenging it. There was no push for constant engagement. No expectation that dogs should always be alert or active. Instead, well-being was understood as something that emerged from calm repetition. The house itself supported this understanding. Rooms designed for quiet remained quiet. Lighting adjusted gradually. Sounds were softened. These environmental choices did not change the rhythm, they protected it. Dogs responded by resting deeply. Their breathing slowed easily. Their bodies relaxed fully. Awareness faded without tension. The trust they placed in their surroundings remained unbroken, strengthened by the quiet reliability of care that respected their needs. Even as new information became available, it was applied with restraint. Caretakers understood that improvement did not require disruption. They preserved what worked. They refined what could be softened. The result was continuity rather than change. Dogs did not need to relearn their routines. They continued to return to the same resting spots, to settle at the same times, to follow the same gentle patterns that had always guided them. Their days remained predictable, their nights uninterrupted. This balance created lasting calm. The dog's well-being was supported not by novelty, but by trust. They trusted that rest would be available, They trusted that nothing sudden would disturb them. They trusted that their environment would remain steady. Modern understanding honored this trust. It did not introduce complexity where simplicity sufficed. It allowed routines to remain gentle and unremarkable, knowing that their very ordinariness was what made them effective. As evenings arrived, nothing changed. Lights dimmed. Movement slowed. Dogs settled into longer rest, guided by the same signals they had always known. The night unfolded without disruption. In this way, knowledge became a quiet companion rather than a force for change. It stood alongside tradition, refining without reshaping, supporting without interfering. The dogs lived comfortably within this balance, unaware of any shift, simply enjoying the calm continuity of their days. The rest remained complete. Their routines remained familiar. Their comfort remained uninterrupted. And as the house settled once more into night, everything felt as it always had, steady, gentle, and quietly complete, held together by understanding that knew when to guide and when to step aside. There is a kind of knowledge that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with charts or explanations. It settles in quietly like evening light, and makes itself known through feeling rather than understanding. This was the kind of science that shaped the days inside the house, a science without formulas, built instead on repetition, rest, and the calm assurance of consistency. For the dogs, none of this needed to be explained. They lived it. Each day followed a familiar arc, not because it had been designed that way, but because it had proven itself gentle and reliable. Morning stirred the body just enough to awaken it. Midday offered space to settle. Evening arrived slowly, allowing everything to soften before night took hold. Within this rhythm, rest did more than restore energy. It created steadiness. Dogs who rested well moved through their days with ease. Their steps were unhurried. Their attention was calm. They responded to their surroundings without tension, as if the world around them posed no threat and demanded no urgency. This steadiness did not come from effort. It came from repetition. Naps returned at familiar times and familiar places. The body learned to expect them, and so it relaxed more quickly each time. Muscles softened sooner. Breathing slowed without resistance. Sleep deepened naturally without being chased or forced. Consistency taught the body what to do. Without instruction, dogs learned that rest was always available. That knowledge alone eased them. There was no need to remain alert, no reason to guard against interruption. Calm became the default state rather than something to be achieved. This quiet science worked without words. It showed itself in posture in the way dogs settled fully into the floor, rather than hovering above it. It appeared in breath, slow, even, and unbroken. It lived in the absence of restlessness, in the ease with which sleep arrived and stayed. Health followed quietly behind. Bodies that rested regularly did not carry tension forward from one moment to the next. Movement remained fluid. Stillness felt complete. The gentle alternation between activity and rest kept everything in balance without extremes. Nothing dramatic occurred. Nothing needed correction. The dog's emotional balance reflected this same simplicity. They were not startled easily. They did not anticipate disruption. They trusted the rhythm that surrounded them, and that trust shaped how they experienced each moment. Calm did not fade quickly. It lingered. This balance was not fragile. It was durable. Consistency gave it strength, because the day unfolded predictably. Dogs did not waste energy preparing for change. They did not brace themselves for uncertainty. They remained present, resting when rest arrived, moving when movement was invited. Their minds stayed quiet because their bodies felt secure. The house reinforced this comfort through sameness. Sounds repeated. Light shifted predictably. Rooms held their character. Nothing surprised the senses. Over time, this familiarity reduced the need for awareness. Attention softened and rest deepened as a result. This was not an accident. It was the result of patterns allowed to continue without interruption. The quiet science of consistency worked because it was left alone. No one tried to improve it. No one rushed it. No one demanded results. And so it continued, quietly effective. Rest supported health not by fixing anything, but by preventing imbalance from forming in the first place. There was no buildup of strain, no accumulation of stress. Each nap released the small tensions of the previous hour, leaving nothing behind. Emotional steadiness followed naturally. Dogs did not cling to moments of activity. They did not resist rest. They moved smoothly between states, guided by habit rather than impulse. Their days felt even, without spikes or drops. This evenness was the true benefit of consistency. It allowed life to feel manageable, unremarkable, and safe. As the afternoon gave way to evening, this quiet science became even more apparent. Rest grew deeper. Awareness softened further. The body, already accustomed to settling, let go completely. Sleep arrived not as an event, but as a continuation. The dog's breathing slowed to its deepest rhythm. Muscles released fully. The world receded without effort. Nothing pulled at their attention. Nothing demanded response. The house held this stillness gently. Lights dimmed. Sounds faded. The rhythm completed itself once again, just as it had countless times before. There was no need to reflect on why it worked. It simply did. The comfort of consistency did not rely on explanation. It required only patience and repetition. In return, it offered steadiness, health, and balance quietly, reliably, and without asking for recognition. As night settled fully, the dogs slept on, carried by a rhythm that had proven itself through time. Their rest was deep, their minds were calm, their bodies were at ease, and within that stillness, the quiet science continued its work and seemed unspoken, and perfectly content to remain that way. As evening began to settle across the house, it did so gently, without asking for attention. The transition from day to night unfolded through small, familiar signals: sound softening, light dimming, movement slowing. These signals did not interrupt the day. They completed it, and for the dogs resting within the walls, they formed a kind of lullaby, steady and reassuring, played the same way each night. The house never fell silent all at once. Instead, it quieted in layers. Voices that had once carried clearly from room to room now arrived muffled and distant. Conversations shortened naturally, trailing off rather than ending abruptly. Laughter softened. Words lost their sharp edges and blended into a gentle background hum. Dogs heard these sounds without reacting. They recognized them not as calls for attention, but as signs that nothing more would be required. These distant voices did not signal activity. They signaled winding down, and so the dogs remained still, letting the sound pass over them like familiar music. Footsteps followed a similar pattern earlier in the day. They had moved with purpose, crossing rooms, ascending and descending stairs, marking time with rhythm and direction. Now they slowed. They spaced themselves farther apart. Each step landed more carefully than the last. The sound of shoes against floors grew softer. Doors closed with intention, not urgency. Drawers were opened and shut gently. These sounds did not disturb rest. They supported it. To the dogs, these muffled footsteps were as soothing as silence. They meant the day was finishing its work. Light played its own quiet role in this evening lullaby. Overhead fixtures dimmed gradually. Lamps replaced brighter sources, casting warm, contained pools of light across rooms. Shadows deepened, stretching longer along walls and settling into corners that had already grown familiar. Dogs did not chase these changes. They had learned the evening light did not invite movement. It invited stillness. As the brightness faded, their awareness followed, sinking gently inward. Eyes closed more fully now. Breathing slowed further. The dimming light signaled that rest was not only acceptable, it was expected. The house itself seemed to acknowledge this transition. Air moved more slowly. Sounds traveled less far. The atmosphere grew heavier in the most comforting way, as if everything were being gently wrapped in quiet. Dogs responded by settling deeper into their resting places. They adjusted slightly, tucking paws beneath bodies, curling into familiar shapes. These movements were small and deliberate, performed without waking fully. Once settled, they did not move again. The lullabies of the household were never intentional. No one planned them. No one coordinated sound, movement, and light. And yet, night after night, they unfolded in the same sequence. Their consistency made them powerful. Dogs trusted these signals completely. They did not wait for direct cues. They did not need to be told it was time to rest. The environment spoke for itself, using the same language it always had. A voice fading in the distance, a hallway growing quiet, a lamp casting a softer glow. Together, these elements formed the pattern that needed no interpretation. As the evening deepened, even these gentle sounds grew fewer. Conversations ended. Footsteps became rare. The house entered its final stage of stillness, holding only the softest traces of life: a distant hum, the subtle movement of air, the quiet presence of those who remain awake. Dogs slept through it all. Their breathing was now slow and steady, barely noticeable. Muscles were fully relaxed. The tension of the day, minimal as it had been, had dissolved completely. The lullaby had done its work. What remained was rest without interruption. Even when a sound briefly broke the quiet, a door closing softly, a voice murmuring nearby, it did not disturb sleep. These sounds belonged to the lullaby too. They were familiar, predictable, harmless. The dogs did not stir. Night settled fully round the house, not as an ending, but as a continuation of calm. The transition felt complete, though nothing had been formally concluded. The living household had quieted itself naturally. Its lullabies faded into silence, leaving behind a deep, steady stillness. Dogs rested within that stillness, held gently by routine and familiarity. Tomorrow, the house would wake again. Sounds would return. Light would grow brighter. movement would resume. But for now, none of that mattered. The lullabies had guided everything to rest once more. And in that quiet, the dog slept on secure, undisturbed, and perfectly at ease, listening, without awareness, to the final notes of a day that had ended exactly as it always did, softly, slowly, and without asking to be remembered. As night settled fully over the house, nothing new was asked of it. The day had already loosened its hold, releasing each moment gently, without resistance. What remained was not an ending, but a continuation, one more quiet turn in a rhythm that had repeated itself countless times before. The dogs slept. They did not know it was night. They did not mark the hour or sense the date. For them, rest was simply rest, arriving when it always did, without announcement or ceremony. Their bodies lay heavy against familiar surfaces. Breathing moved in slow, even patterns. The world beyond their immediate comfort had faded completely. Leashes lay still nearby, unused and unconsidered. They were tools of movement, of connection, of brief excursions into the day. But now, they rested too. Draped quietly over hooks or folded into familiar places, they waited without expectation. There was no urgency tied to them, no anticipation. They would be there again when morning returned. This was the legacy that mattered most. Not the visible moments, not the occasions remembered or recorded, but the unremarkable continuity of rest, repeated day after day, night after night. The house held this continuity effortlessly. Its walls had witnessed countless evenings like this one. Light dimming, sounds fading, stillness settling. The sequence never needed to change. It did not grow old. It did not lose meaning through repetition. Dogs had come and gone over time, each with their own quiet habits, their own preferred spots, their own rhythms. And yet, the pattern remained unchanged. Each one learned it. Each one lived within it. Each one rested into it without question. There was no grand transition from wakefulness to sleep. It happened the same way it always had, gradually, imperceptibly, until awareness simply slipped away. The dogs did not resist this letting go. They had done it before. They trusted the process. The unremarkable nature of their sleep was its greatest strength. There was nothing to notice, nothing to reflect on. Sleep did not need to be deep or dramatic. It only needed to be complete. And completeness came easily in a place shaped by routine. The house itself seemed to rest alongside them. Air remained still. Sound held its distance. Light stayed low and gentle. Nothing moved quickly. Nothing intruded. The environment asked nothing of its occupants, animal or human. This quiet cooperation had been built slowly, not through intention, but through repetition. Through days that unfolded similarly enough to create trust. Through nights that arrived without disruption. Through routines that were allowed to continue without being questioned. The legacy of these routines did not live in memory. It lived in the body. In the way dogs settled without circling endlessly. In the way breathing slowed naturally. In the absence of tension carried from one moment to the next. This legacy did not seek recognition. It did not demand attention. It did not mark itself as important. It existed precisely because it was overlooked. Because it blended so completely into daily life that it became invisible. The dogs slept on, unaware that their rest mirrored something larger. The steady continuity of the home itself. Walls that had stood through change. Rooms that had adapted without losing their character. Routines that absorbed new lives without altering their essence. The house did not require endings. Each night faded into the next, linked by the same quiet patterns. Morning would return when it was ready. Activity would rise gently. Movement would resume without urgency. But none of that needed anticipation. For now, rest was enough. The dog slept deep and slightly, then settled into its final rhythm. There were no dreams worth noting, no disturbances to recall, just the steady presence of stillness holding everything in place. This was how the story always ended. Not with conclusion, not with reflection, but with continuation. Another quiet night, another familiar rest, another unremarkable moment carried forward. And in that gentle fade where nothing demanded attention and nothing asked to be remembered, the legacy endured. Not written, not spoken, but breathed quietly into the dark, night after night. As the house remained what it had always been, a place where rest arrived without effort, and sleep, once found, was allowed to remain.